Hey friends, Dean here. Before we get you on to your episode, I want to take a moment to invite you to our next virtual online trivia night. Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Join us either on our Facebook group or on our YouTube page for 3 rounds of fun trivia, music questions, movie questions, general knowledge questions. It'll be a fun time and a chance to win some prizes and have just a good relaxing night of some trivia at home. You don't even have to go out for it. So don't forget, Wednesday, March 13th at 8 p.m. Join us on our Facebook group or YouTube for 3 rounds of fun virtual online trivia. We'll see you there. In this episode, we're catching up with Eric Clapton as he survived the 80s and then closed it out with his strongest album of the decade, 1989's Journeyman. Stay with us.
Get ready for the 3324 podcast, where lifelong friends Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber share their love of all things music and movies. Dean has directed short films and is a music trivia buff, and Eric, trained in audio engineering, brings his extensive knowledge of music and film to the conversation as they discuss, debate, and celebrate their favorite albums, films, and much more.
Welcome, friends, to the 3324 podcast. So happy and grateful you can make it to our little corner of the internet where we notch out weekly doses of music and movie goodness that we share with you. Right, Eric?
That's correct. How are you, Dean?
I'm doing well. Sharing is caring. That's what the Care Bears say. Sharing is caring. So we need to share our love of music and movies and our trivia and bits of information with you. And
that's right. Yeah.
We're glad you join us each week. It means a lot to us. And we certainly have a blast doing this. Complete the circle. If you haven't yet, you need to close out this loop that you're in of listening and go to our social media. Check us out on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast. If you're into tweeting on Twitter before Elon Musk buys Twitter, you can get us there at 3324p as well.
Okay.
Until they come out with some new social media that we'll get on.
New concept, that we all got to figure out.
You know what? We're on YouTube as well. We don't really talk about YouTube. We post our live shows, automatically get posted to YouTube. We've posted some of the video versions of our podcast as well because we record video. So if you want to see what our mugs look like and see me making weird faces or whatever, you can certainly go to YouTube and look at some of those videos as well.
Yeah, that's right. We don't do enough on YouTube. Perhaps we should slide it over there. Maybe we'll see.
Yeah, our exclusive Boba Fett episode is over there though. That's
there you go.
You can't get that anywhere else but on YouTube.
That's right. And we have, like you said, we had snippets of some of our episodes there as well. So
so good stuff there. So check that out too if you're into the video. So we're here now after a brief respite or hiatus that we took.
Yes,
you'll
sir.
You'll never know. We record so much content. We have such a backlog of recorded content.
We're ready.
It's like Tupac. Like we'll be putting stuff out after, if we ever end the show, it'll probably go on for 2 more years, just with stuff that just keeps getting released. So we build it that way where we could we build it up so we could take time off and not have a.
That's right. We have it in the pocket.
A skip in content, right?
It's
because that's the thing.
In the back pockets, in the side pockets, we got it's
We're ready. Like the guy that's got like the 5 watches on his arm that wants to sell them. Like we have episodes like that deep. So this one is going to be a good one. We've been dancing, we've been circling around Clapton for a while. We kind of were talking about what should we do. We kind of talked about Layla, and then we kind of stutter stepped with it and kind of moved away from it, and we did some other things, and then I'm like, let's do Clapton, let's revisit it, and then let's talk
about the album this was pretty much the first album that we both got into. Really, for me, it was like I got into Eric Clapton.
And that's what I want to talk about, and that's kind of a subplot of this show is favorite artists because let's do the stats, and then we'll get into that.
Yep, let's do it.
You know what? We have to have structure. We have to have form. We have to have order. Then it can go off the rails and go to shit. But at least we need to start out like, dun dun. Let's just start out with it, with the framework, and then it just kind of blasts open, right?
Oh, we need to get that sound effect. We got to get it.
Not without getting sued. Dick Wolf or somebody from NBC or Peacock will be like all over it. Like,
no.
Oh, how many times did you use it? 150,000
There you
times in an
go.
instance.
That's right.
So, all right, we'll just
Folded
do
it up in
once
his
then.
pocket. Yep.
There goes the
Oh,
budget. So
there
we're
you go.
talking about Journeyman from 1989. This was released in November of 1989,
Yeah, it was
produced by
pretty
Russ
late in the year.
Titleman. Hit number 16 on the Billboard charts. That's pretty respectable. There were 5 singles that were released. None of them really charted in a big way, so I'm just going to go through. They were Pretending, Bad Love, Before You Accuse Me, No Alibis, and Run So Far. He did win a Grammy for this album, though. He won best male rock performance for
yeah.
Bad Love, which is really nice. The album went 2 times platinum, so that's in excess of 2. We should need to do an in excess episode, so I can say
Right?
in excess was in excess of.
You know what? I was going to say that because you say it so often. In excess, and I'm like, and it does pop into my head. Like, let's talk about in excess.
So if we do it, when we do in excess, we'll probably do like Kick or whatever. I won't say when I do their album sales, I won't say in excess of. I'll say they sold more than. This way, it won't be confusing.
Oh, okay,
right,
all right.
Because we'll have to take out.
You heard it here first, folks.
2 times platinum is in excess of 2 million copies. But yeah, let's start with favorite artists, because for me, or people change what their favorites are over time, right? I guess, right? I mean, for me, I can say I've liked, a certain group of artists from time immemorial, like when I got into them, and those have been kind of the standbys. And then you get into other things come and go, right? But when we were getting into music, Phil Collins was like the thing for you. Like Phil Collins was it in Genesis, and you're really on the progressive rock kind of spectrum of music, and that was like your wheelhouse. And you were into him when Phil Collins was everywhere. Like it was the perfect time. Like if you're going to be into an artist, like you got into him, like the early mid 80s was like a cornucopia. I mean, he was everywhere. So if you wanted Phil, you had him.
You did.
Then all of a sudden, I don't know when it happened, because I don't recall it ever happening. Because then all of a sudden, you really weren't into Phil Collins that much anymore, and you were really heavily
into Clapton,
like a switch that flipped into Clapton. So can you kind of explain that to? I'd like to know, for me, because we never really. I just kind of like, oh, okay, he's not really into Phil Collins anymore, and he's now into Clapton. It's kind of like a midstream change.
Yeah. Well, this all starts with the fact that Phil, amongst other things that he was doing, with Genesis, he was in a band, he was working on a solo career, and then he became a producer. Like Frida from ABBA came to him and asked him to produce an album for her, and he's like, "I why are you asking me?" kind of thing, and he just took and all of a sudden he became a producer, and then people started asking him to produce their record. So he actually produced a record for Eric Clapton in '85 called Behind the Sun. And the album was, they went to Antigua to record it, and they loved it. They loved what they were doing. It was very synth heavy, you could definitely tell Phil had a presence on that record, but I enjoyed it. It was weird. It was different. It was Clapton of the '80s, which is very divisive among fans.
Behind the Sun had, Forever Man on it.
Yes,
and She's Waiting. Those were like the two.
Well, She's Waiting was a track that Phil had produced.
Yeah.
They showed it to the record company, Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers was like, "There's no singles off this album," as it was originally. And much to their chagrin, both Phil and Eric were very upset about that. They were like, "Well, we liked what we did, but Eric understood that, he wasn't one of these artists where he understood that if I don't agree to what they're saying to me, they're going to drop me like that." They dropped Van Morrison very easily, Warner Brothers, because Van Morrison made a stand about something, and they just dropped him like that. So Clapton understood that, and his management knew that. So they pretty much told him, you need some hit singles off this record. So he actually had to re-record. At that point, Phil was not available, so he went off in Los Angeles and recorded 3 tracks, and they deleted 3 tracks from the album, recorded 3 other tracks, and Forever Man was one of those tracks. Now, and that was the hit single off the record.
Mhm.
And so now we're switching forward to, Journeyman. And at this point, it's not like I didn't like Phil Collins anymore, but because he became so popular, he was all over the place. And I didn't particularly care for his later solo work at the time. The thing that I did appreciate, though, was that he introduced me to Eric Clapton, right? Like because he worked with him, and I thought it was the coolest thing.
Is that like your girlfriend introducing you to the woman that will be eventually your new girlfriend?
Maybe. Here's the thing.
You're initially listening to things because Phil Collins was involved. He's playing,
that's right.
He's writing songs, but then you end up kind of becoming enamored or more enamored in a different way with the new artist.
Well, because Phil Collins introduced me to artists that he was very fond of, right? And again, he was also into. They both had this common ground of liking Black American music, very steeped in R&B.
Mm-hmm.
Phil was more on the Motown side of things, the R&B, like soul, that kind of thing. And Clapton was obviously the blues man. And, so when when he introduced me to Clapton, and, because I knew Clapton, I knew Layla, I knew Cream, I knew, the things that he'd done. But I wasn't that aware of that stuff. So, it's like, why is he working with Phil Collins? Like, this is odd. This is a very odd pairing.
Yeah.
And
especially in light of working with Philip Bailey previous to that, and the artists that were kind of asking Phil Collins to work with him, and he was kind of going a little more poppy with his own music as well. Like his solo stuff was really kind of going, especially, in that direction, heading off in that direction. So,
right. Well, the thing
I totally get what you're saying.
For me, it was at this point, a lot of it has to do with my own personal interest and the way I was as a kid. I wanted to grow up really fast. So I was, I guess, turning into somewhat of a, maybe a snob or something. Like I was trying to get into like more sophisticated types of music. I was starting to, head down that path of blues and jazz, and Clapton pretty much opened the door for me. So that's why I became such a fan, because his approach to the material was very accessible, very easy to listen to. But at the same time, the way he would tell you that, no, you need to go back and listen to these guys. So I did, so he was my tour guide, as it were. And there was no other artist that actually did that for me half as much as he did. And and that's the thing that I love most about him. So that's why I became such a fan. And then, of course, you go back, just like I did with Phil and Genesis, and you go back and listen to a lot of the older material. And it's just one of those things. Everything clicks into place, and, but, you understand the ups and downs too. You also, unfortunately, you get to know what's good, what's bad. And,
well, Clapton, he's got a, if nothing else, he's very prolific. Just a quick side note. On the album Behind the Sun, who plays acoustic guitar in one of the tracks?
Yes, Lindsey Buckingham.
Oh, Lindsey Buckingham.
And that's actually on one of the tracks that was produced by Lenny Waronker of Warner Brothers.
I'm going to get a bell. And anytime we mention Jeff Lynne or Lindsey Buckingham, I'm going to ring a bell so everyone knows it's coming. Yes, he does.
Something's Happening is the name of the track. And yes, Lindsey Buckingham plays rhythm acoustic guitar on that track. Yes.
So let's do a little, just, obviously, if you don't know who Eric Clapton is, I'm not sure how you found this podcast. I'm not sure. Maybe you stumbled upon it, but so we'll kind of give you the benefit of the doubt. Clapton started his career in the 60s, steeped in the whole English blues scene. What was it, John Mayall first and then the Yardbirds, or was it the Yardbirds, then John Mayall?
It was the Yardbirds first.
The Yardbirds, then the Blues Breakers.
Then the
John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. Then he went to Cream, which was one of the first power trios with Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce.
Yep.
Continued after that with just
Blind Faith,
which was a quote unquote another super group with Steve Winwood. One album, that was it. Yep. One and done. Hung out with Delaney and Bonnie. And then that formed kind of Derek and the Dominoes, which was him and Dwayne Allman, which they put out their album, Layla and other assorted love songs. I make fun of him a lot, but yeah, it's the ultimate, he's the ultimate wife stealer. It's about unrequited love. Clapton was madly in love with George Harrison's wife at the time.
Pattie Boyd. Yep.
She really wasn't, she was kind of spurning those advances, but he was it was an obsession for him.
That's right. And he would write several. I mean, pretty much
Yeah.
the entire Layla album is about her, but it didn't end there.
Yeah.
And there's actually a track on that. We'll get to it, but he would write several songs for her.
Yeah.
So she's pretty popular.
Yeah. And, I mean, and the funny thing about it is eventually George Harrison would divorce her.
Yeah.
Clapton and Patty Boyd would get together, but they actually wouldn't get married until 1979. But they were kind of a couple for a while. And oddly enough, the ultimate nice guy, George Harrison, him and Clapton were best buds. Like no hard feelings. Like
they were. Yeah.
It takes a certain, normally you'd be like, this guy's a scumbag. I don't want nothing to do with him. George Harrison just
was, well, if she's going to be with anybody, I'd like it to be Eric. And wow. But according to Eric, his side of the story is more like, well, there was a lot of that going on anyway. And I think there's certain truth to that.
Wife swapping?
Swapping girlfriends. Okay. And so George was no saint either in that.
Oh, no, definitely not.
In that camp. So, but yeah, I mean, it is a very, very interesting tale. That has become, rooted
it's a legendary. It's one of the legendary, rock love stories. Clapton has had more than his fair share of substance abuse issues. He's battled them. He's come out. He's relapsed. When we catch up to Clapton in '89, he's sober. He's clean, newly sober from his battle in the 70s. He relapsed, big alcoholic.
Yes.
Kind of came back out of that, as it were, to frame this. And then just before, so you're talking about Behind the Sun with Phil Collins.
Yeah.
Clapton releases another album in the 80s after that called August, which it's in the way that you use it, which is From the Color of Money.
Which Phil also produced,
yes,
for the most part, except for that one track. But yeah.
So Clapton is kind of keeping busy. Behind the Sun does have more of an 80s feel to it.
They all do.
A little bit. Yeah. This is the lead. You know what? And maybe that's what attracted me to this, because I was never a big Clapton fan yet. Like you said, everybody knows I Shot the Sheriff, After Midnight, Cocaine. I mean, you listen to FM radio back then. Clapton was one of the anchors of album-oriented rock, be it with his work with Cream, be it with Derek and the Dominoes, be it with his solo stuff.
Yeah.
The guy, he was just one of those people. So what happens though, after August, something really special happens is they release a box set called Crossroads.
Yes.
Which I think was a turning point for him, because it kind of, this was back when that came out, like big box sets weren't a thing yet. It was kind of on the horizon. Like you didn't see, this was like 4 CDs or 5 or 6 LPs. It had a cassette version of it as well. A really complete compendium of his career from soup to nuts for up to that point. If you were not into Clapton, you could pick up Crossroads and get everything.
That was it for me.
I think that was a turning point. The
culmination of that with Journeyman at that year, because it came out roughly around the same time period. It was a perfect companion piece up to that point, because it really went all the way up to August, which was 86. So there were tracks from that album on this box set. So we really got like right up to the moment, and then his brand new album,
complete retrospective. I mean, and
credit has to be given to a guy named Bill Levinson who put that package together. He's a music historian. He did the great Dylan box set. He also did the Allman Brothers box set, Dreams. So if those are, I don't think they're actually available anymore. I mean, you could probably find them like on an eBay or something like that. Certainly there have been others that have been made since then, the compilations, but nothing really compared to the care and the attention that, because he put on a lot, like I think a third of that Crossroads set was unreleased material, outtakes, B-sides,
lives,
things of that nature, which was, which at the time was not a common thing.
Yeah, I think it was a watershed moment for music, because this career retrospective came out covering everything, and usually you can't get. Usually it's hard to get if you're on different labels and different rights and different songwriters. It's hard to get all that stuff together. It's hard to wrangle all that into one package, and they did it. And I remember when it came out, and everybody was going bonkers for Crossroads. It kind of really, I mean, the guy, and it's not like the guy's career was over, but at that point it was just like was kind of like a demarcation point of, okay, here's where I've been, here's where I'm at up to this point.
Right.
And then, that came out in 88. And then the following year, Journeyman came out, which I think, I said in the open, I think it was his strongest album of the 80s. It's one that
absolutely.
Clapton says is one of his favorites as well.
That's right.
He really liked it. And it closed out the 80s, and I think it closed out the 80s in a very un-80s way that the other ones didn't. It started to lose a lot of the 80s-ish, with maybe the exception of Anything for Your Love. Like that kind of still has
very 80s, no alibis. But
that
they
opening
have
like keyboard in the beginning of it is kind of like a vestige of it. But this is a riff heavy album and a solo heavy album. There's two distinct things. He's got a lot of great riffs in this, and then he's also doing a lot of nice soloing too.
Very, very and it's blended in. It's very understated. The solo, like just the little accents, the little, measures that he does is really, and he doesn't do it that often, which is, so a lot of the albums he put out after this, people complain that there's just not enough guitar. I beg to differ. You need to listen to it. You need to listen, and you need to really listen for it, because that's what he's, his understatement with the instrument is to me much more powerful than anything that he did in the early.
He's not the Flash.
I don't know any other artist who works so hard to be a master of understatement than Eric Clapton, honestly. And people will take that as, he's just lazy. He doesn't have the skill set. That may be true, but he knows. But I think he has the intuition.
Think so. I think he just knows he doesn't,
I think he has the intuition to say, like, look, I don't want to be flashy. I don't want that. But it's much more powerful when you can do something that's very tasteful, very understated, very elegant.
Make an impression.
That's right. Yeah.
And I remember when this album came out because of the music video for Pretending, and it kind of caught me because it's him in the rain. It's him in the rain, and he's playing guitar, and the band is around him, and so it was a very that's when those videos back in the 80s needed something to grab you. So it was like Clapton playing in the rain outside, but it was just a great song too. So that kind of hooked me. It was the visuals hooked me, and I'm like, oh, this is, Clapton's got like longer hair and he's got a beard. So I'm like, oh, kind of like looking a little hipper.
He's got that Italian haircut going and the Armani suits. And he was on SNL with the looking all fancy and I admired that about him. Like that, there was a sense of style to the guy that everybody else was just rock and roll heavy, leather pants and, spandex and all that.
Yeah, he didn't really go for any of that anyway.
Yeah, here was a guy that just looked like the perfect gentleman, and here he is, banging out these riffs of really heavy blues. And Phil Collins would joke to him, like, you're wearing Armani suits, you're driving Ferraris. What do you know about the blues?
Yeah.
He knows. And Clapton's like, it's not about that. It's a state of mind.
Yeah.
And that was his response to that.
And he's certainly been there. He's certainly been there.
Yeah,
now you talked about Behind the Sun.
Yeah.
And how it was rejected and how they really weren't, the label wasn't really happy about that. What came of that actually is Jerry Lynn Williams as a result as well. They started to say, Clapton said, well, get me somebody who's going to write hits and record them for, give me demos or give me recordings.
Yeah.
And show me the money. If you want me to do stuff, give me good material then. And Jerry Lynn Williams, or just Jerry Williams, became a collaborator, and he's really on the forefront of this album. And
he's the unsung hero of this record.
I think he anchors the album because he's got the lion's share of the writing credits.
That's right.
And I think he pairs well with Clapton. Like I would never have known that like Running on Faith was not written by Clapton. Like that.
That's right.
I thought that was that seems like a song that Clapton
wrote. It's a
wrote.
staple. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's not, it's written by Jerry Williams, and he had such a deft touch on this album that most of the originals are his. And then there's a couple of covers. You got Hound Dog, and you have Before You Accuse Me, and you have Ray Charles. So you've got like some of the standards peppered in, not full on blues. And maybe that's what I like about this album too, is it's not a full on blues album. It's a rock album with some blues songs in there as well.
That's right. It's eclectic. There's an eclectic nature to it, which is very, in his solo career is very common. I mean, No Reason to Cry was an album like that. He had the band on that album. He had Dylan. He had a lot of guest stars on this album, Journeyman. So he's kind of returning to that form of collaboration. And as such, with each artist, the song changes. So, he's working with George Harrison on. So it sounds like
that absolutely sounds like, okay. So yeah,
it's a George Harrison.
I thought we were going to get there a little bit later, but yeah.
Okay.
So George Harrison has a song, Run So Far, on this. And it's funny because, George Harrison at this point was coming off the heels of Cloud Nine and working on Traveling Wilburys, and Clapton played on Cloud Nine. But when you hear Run So Far, it does not sound like, I can't even figure out when it was written, because it doesn't sound like a George Harrison song of that time. It sounds like more of like his early 80s or late 70s stuff. It almost sounds like this was like a track that was unused, because it doesn't sound like the recent stuff that he was doing. Because as soon as you hear it, it's like Cracker Box Palace, and it has that
quirky,
in that era of there. Yeah. And it's like, it is unmistakably a George Harrison song. And then George Harrison kind of helps out on it with the vocals as well. So a great, and then Phil Collins makes his final appearance on Bad Love, which I really like. At this point, Phil Collins might've been kind of in the getting towards the overexposure, but on Bad Love, it's not the booming, it's not the in the air tonight drums. It's more straightforward kind of
rock drummers,
really great drumming, really great fills, but not those booming Phil Collins drums. His harmony vocals are just at the right time.
That's right.
And it's actually not so forward in the mix that you can absolutely tell it's him. You can kind of be like, is that Phil Collins? Which is great. It's a perfect way to use him for his drumming skills in a straightforward song, and then providing some harmony vocals just at the right time on that song. This album's a slam dunk. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah, and that song was co-written with Mick Jones of Foreigner, ironically enough. So I think Mick Jones actually wrote, I believe it's the bridge of the song. That was his contribution to it, because Eric was kind of like he was at a standstill. He got the riff down.
Was he at a crossroads?
He was at a crossroads. He was right at that moment where he was just like, I don't have a bridge. He got the riff down, but he just couldn't get that. So that was Mick Jones's contribution. So, but yeah, it's a killer song. It really is. And you know what? Ironically enough, at the time, I didn't think so. But
really?
Now,
I loved it when it came out.
When I revisit it, it's like, this is a really great track. And
that song cooks, because you've got other guest players. I mean, Jim Keltner is prominently featured on this. He's no slouch, but he's a different type of drummer than Phil Collins. Phil Collins, I think his drumming really helps drive this song.
Well, there's a slickness to it. There's a very, it's very amped up. It's very, it's a rock and roll. I think according to Eric, it was his, I guess he was trying to allude to the fact that it was like the 80s Layla, kind of like it had that.
It's got that feel. It's got the riff. It's got the break in the middle.
Yep.
I'd say good, well done then. If he was trying to adapt something, adapt some of his material, I think it's a good one. I mean, there's so much on here. It's funny because I hadn't listened to Journeyman in so long.
Yeah,
and then when I did, when each song just rolled off, I'm like, Jesus Christ! Like I forgot how there was no filler. I'm like, oh my God, and then Old Love came on.
That's
which is just
favorite.
Another great one.
And that's about Patty.
Yeah, that was the one.
Old Love is about her post their breakup. Yeah. So
and why did they break up? Because he's fooling around on something. Fooling around on his wife.
Yeah. And
he's a woman. Yeah, we got to put it out there. He likes to have fun. He likes to have his fun.
Well, his addictions didn't end with substance. It was clothes. It was cars. It was women. So
he's not perfect. He's not a perfect person.
Oh, no, by no stretch.
By no means. We won't even touch on some. And
that's
of the
the thing
stuff.
that those are the things that you don't wish that you delve too far into getting to know your so-called heroes, because once you find out something that happened or, whatever, it's disappointing. So they kind of drop the bar a little bit, and it's just, but then it's all about the music anyway. So you just keep going back.
And that was the thing.
That's what matters.
When I put this on, I'm like, wow. I was like, I forgot how really great this was. It was kind of one, I have it on CD and it's tucked away somewhere. And it was on the list of albums to do, though. For some reason, when I was making the original list of things, Journeyman was on there. I'm like, we got to get to this eventually. I'm like, it was just such a, a turning point for you, right?
Turning point for me
in embracing a new artist and kind of,
right,
opening yourself up to something new.
This was the perfect album to really start with, and like I said, I didn't know much about. It really was just a lot of research, a lot of going back, because there was several things written about him at the time. There were biographies, there were things, so there was a lot of history there to delve into.
Yeah, especially so coming off of Crossroads. I mean, that was like a historical document of his career right there.
Yeah, that's right. And that paired with, like I said, with this new record, just really, it was at that point that and I felt like this was like this was like his second coming, in my opinion. Like, because I'm making a Clapton as God reference here, but no, seriously. I mean, once, and then of course, the tragic, he loses his son, and that really put him over the top and said, I am no longer drinking at all, because he did fall off the wagon a few times at this point.
Yeah. He kept trying, he fought the good fight,
he fought the good fight. And you would think that something like that, as tragic as that, would have, gotten him back into that. But no, he that was the thing. It was because of that he said, I'm no longer, I owe it to my son, because of, so I'm never going to touch this stuff again. And he changed as a result. And I think his music, he took, I wouldn't say it's the greatest stuff he's ever done, but it's, but the mindset is there. He's working hard. He's trying to change his image a lot. And he just, those tours, those later tours, were some of the best concerts I've ever seen, because of just his playing. And
but before we get to that, because we'll get into how many times you've seen him, but I guess one of the only vestige, or the only thing that would really earmark this album from the 80s is the appearance of Daryl Hall. You don't get much more 80s than Daryl Hall from Hall & Oates, right?
Very
kind of like, and he but that's the thing is he's got a lot of great guests on this, right?
Chaka Khan.
Yeah,
Chaka also Khan. Singing backing vocals on this record. I love when
Clapton has female singers behind him.
Yeah.
There's nothing better. I think he's at his strongest. I think his vocals are, it's a really good counterpunch, because he's not a prolific vocalist where he goes.
He's more of a crooner,
but and this one he's really singing. He's really kind of putting some force behind it. So then when you've got like the
he grew into his voice
singers,
for sure.
I've always loved it. I've always loved when. And even in his 70s stuff, when he's, like Lay Down Sally and stuff, just that counterpoint of the female backing vocals, just really do it. But yeah, Daryl Hall makes an appearance on here, which is
No Alibis.
No Alibis. Yep.
Yeah.
And then if we're just finishing out some of the guests, Steve Ferrone.
Steve
Ferrone go on to become the drummer for Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. He's on here. This is, if you go look at the Wikipedia, these are like the pros.
Robert Cray.
And a lot of his Robert Cray, Pino Palladino, Nathan East, who would become part of his touring concern group.
Greg Philliganes on keyboards. Yep.
Yeah. So he got a lot of his touring band out of these sessions, and they would stay with him for a while, right? The 24 Nights, which would be the following release.
That's right.
Would be a live album. So speaking of live, I saw him twice. Did I see him both times with you, or just once? I think I saw him on this tour. Then I know he came around again, and it was just like a blues thing, and you had an extra ticket, or we got tickets, and I went with you.
I actually had 2 sets of tickets on the Journeyman tour, which I gave to you because I couldn't go the second time.
Thank you.
So I think you went with our friend John.
Oh, thank you. We thank you now.
Yeah. So you guys saw him for the first time at Madison Square, because that was the show. And then, yes, on the blues tour, the Nothing But the Blues tour, I had an extra ticket, and
we went. That was like Nassau Coliseum.
And as I recall, you were not.
No, I was not
a fan of that show, and I loved it.
At the time, I wanted to. I was in I want to hear the hits mode. Like I was in that mode of I'm going to see Clapton. I want to hear it. Yep. I wasn't getting. I wasn't getting what he was laying down, and I remember that night too. And you said it's going to be all blues. It's going to be. I was like, whatever, okay, go, but. It was kind of like,
to me, it was like a history. It was like I was like watching a sort of a tribute to the blues. That's what it was. Well, that's what it was. I mean, it's initially. So for me, because I had already known a lot what he was doing and that kind of thing. So for me, it was like, oh yeah, this is great stuff. So I was already in the door, and so I absolutely love that show. Yeah, I can understand how people wouldn't, though. I mean, it would have been nice to squeeze in a couple of his bluesier numbers. Like you could definitely, like, he could have put in like Old Love or something of that nature that he wrote.
Yeah.
So that was a great show. And then, I pretty much from Journeyman on, I think I saw him on probably every major world tour. I know he does a lot of concerts in between, like little snippets here and there, but like every major world tour, like Pilgrim to, all the way up to 2007. I think I saw him. I think it was a grand total of like maybe 11, 12 times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that your biggest? Yeah. Is that your most, or is Tedeschi Trucks
the most? Tedeschi Trucks are actually the band I've seen absolutely the most.
Wow.
And we'll get to them in a minute. But yeah, they but Clapton, I mean, pretty much, like I said, every major tour, it was I saw a number of times in Florida. I actually, on my 40th birthday, I actually flew up to New York just by myself. I didn't want to I just wanted to fly in, fly out, just because I had to see him. For some reason, I had to see him at the Garden. And it was a very special show. It was 2006, and it was he had Derek Trucks in the band and Doyle Bramhall, the New Blood.
Those are two of his acolytes, for those that don't know.
He was reinvigorated. I don't think I've ever heard him heard him play with such vigor and sing as well as he did in that show and the previous tour before that in 2004. That was at the absolute two best shows for Clapton that I ever saw. And it was just amazing. It was just because like he the thing about Clapton is that he's constantly surrounding himself with younger guitar players and because he needs to have that inspiration. He's one of these guys who could freely admit, if these guys didn't light the fire under my ass, I'd just be doing all the same stuff all the time. And of course, these guys, they don't want to play Tears in Heaven.
No,
right?
And they got something to prove. I mean, if they're going to share the stage with Clapton, they're going to play
Layla. They're going to play Cream. They're going, this is what they wanted to play. They got to bring it.
Yeah, they can't fool around. So this is like their shot.
I basically got to see, in a sense, like Derek and the Dominoes. Yeah. Because he pretty much did the entire album of Layla on that tour and over time. And it was, it's just to hear that and to, was just absolutely amazing. So it's a lot of history. Again, a lot of history there.
Crossroads story. We've talked about that a couple times. So,
the Crossroads thing was big because a lot of the, like I said, like because of Eric Clapton, I got into Robert Cray, I got into Doyle, I got into all these other artists that I probably would not have gotten into had it not been for my love of his approach to the blues and even Sheryl Crow for as an example. I mean, because she's really in that wheelhouse of doing that kind of music as well. Right. She collaborated with him quite a few times and she was there at that show and
they did more than collaborate.
They collaborated in more.
They did more than collaborate. Let's put that out there. That was on our Sheryl Crow episode as well.
I think
oddly enough that with the Sheryl Crow episode, this is going to follow the Sheryl Crow episode. So
I think the song, my favorite mistake, I think was written about Eric. I think so. I could be mistaken, but it's rumored, heavily rumored that that's what the song.
That's
about,
what it was.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
So back to Journeyman, right?
Yeah.
He closes out the 80s with this. His next quote unquote studio album would be the soundtrack for a movie called Rush, which was a really great film. Not seen by very many people, but there is a song on it. At the last track is a song called Tears in Heaven. Which again kind of got lost in the shuffle, I think, at the time. It wouldn't be until 92 that the soundtrack to the movie Rush came out in 91. 92, he would do an episode of Unplugged for MTV, and he would perform it there. And yes, his son Connor had passed away in the interim. Unfortunately, tragically fell out of a window in New York City. just a tragic thing. The kid was what, like 4 years old.
He was 4. Yeah.
Very young. So he wrote that song for him. It appeared in the movie Rush, but kind of it wasn't until Unplugged came out that it really, the renaissance, like the renaissance between, I think, Crossroads, Journeyman, and then Unplugged would kind of complete this cycle of bringing Eric Clapton back into like the hearts and minds of everybody, because Unplugged just took off, and he was like the he would be the unlikeliest person you'd see on MTV Unplugged, because at the time, 91, 92,
it was grunge.
You're seeing the grunge stuff, you're seeing, the alternative stuff on MTV, and then he shows up with, Andy Fairweather Lowe, was it Ray Cooper, a couple of his pals, and they just run through. They run through, a lot of standards. They do the stuff with the kazoos. I mean, they just had a really good time with it. But it was his rendition of "Tears in Heaven" that put that over the top.
Yeah, that was the album, and it won.
Won six, nominated for 9 Grammys, won 6.
Won 6. Yeah.
10 platinum, which is over 10 million copies sold of that thing.
Yeah,
absolutely powerhouse. And the guy does not play an electric guitar on it whatsoever, which he's known for. Like, he's known for playing his Strat and firing off blues licks electrically. And this is an album of him with an acoustic guitar with minimal
laid back atmosphere. Yeah,
just kind of rolling through these songs. Like a musical roadmap of his career and some of the stuff that he liked as well.
That's right. And it gave him the confidence to return to the blues. The blues never, it was always in his soul, always there. He would always cite that as his passion. And to this day, I think he says that he's like, it's better than sex, money, drugs. The blues will always be the best thing about my life. And it's true. I mean, it carried him through everything. I think it really, I honestly believe it saved his life, because the guy could have died, or should have died 10 times over in his career.
He's had his share of personal tragedies and
passional tragedies, all
marriages and
bad
marriages and all that kind of stuff. So it's funny that he, as a young person, he grew up enamored with it, but they say you have to live it to really be able to play it,
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he ended up doing that. I mean, he ended up, really abusing himself with drugs and
a lot of it's self-inflicted, sure.
Yeah.
But
he was his own worst enemy in a lot of those cases. But he ended up living that, and coming out the other side for better or for worse now. But when Unplugged came out, it absolutely was a renaissance for him. It was all of a sudden, Eric Clapton was like back on the radar. And I think those 3 pinnacle points, I think, of Crossroads and Journeyman, and then coming out with the Unplugged, he was well positioned, because like the box set kind of raised his profile a little bit for people that were longtime fans from way back. They got it, something they could get into. A new fan like you was able to get kind of like the Pet Sounds box set for the Beach Boys. Like,
that's right.
People that got that all of a sudden went back and became like big fans of the Beach Boys. And I think Crossroads did that for him. He follows that out with a super strong release. He wins a Grammy with Journeyman. I'm going to say, right, strongest of the 80s. Was that you think it was his best work?
Journeyman for sure. Yeah. There's no doubt.
Yeah. And then
80s was not his best, period. I mean, everybody agrees. He was there. He was alive.
Prolific. Yeah. I mean, he put out what? Money and Cigarettes.
Money and Cigarettes and Behind the Sun.
And
another
then
ticket was 81,
which was live.
That was the live at the Bootcon, but then another ticket was
I thought another ticket was live too.
No, okay. It was the album right before Money and Cigarettes, and then he changed bands at that point. And earlier, he had Ry Cooder playing with him and guys like that, and so I mean, he was still there. He was like trying to adapt, and then of course there's he toured with Roger Waters on his first solo tour, which much to the chagrin of his management, like, what are you doing? You're Eric Clapton. You don't need to be a sideman to another artist, but he didn't care.
He doesn't mind.
And he took those kinds of risks. He took those kinds of chances, and he did soundtrack work. Rush wasn't his only soundtrack. He did several that didn't really make it. I think he did a soundtrack to a movie called Homeboy with Mickey Rourke
Yeah,
about
it was a boxer. Yep.
And I've never seen the movie. I've never seen it come out.
I saw Homeboy I actually saw Homeboy like back in the day.
I had the soundtrack.
But you
I
never
had
saw
the
the movie?
cassette, but I never saw the movie.
Yeah, I don't
And
remember. I
of
saw it,
course,
but I
I
don't
had
remember.
Rush, and Rush, by the
Yeah.
way, is an amazing soundtrack. His playing.
That was him and
on
Michael Kamen, right? What did the?
He was inspired by Michael Caine because he had
Yeah.
done work with him on the Lethal Weapon films,
Yeah.
but Clapton composed the
Oh, it's
music
just all
himself.
Clapton?
It's
Okay.
all Clapton. It's
Yep.
it's just all him. This instrumental guitar work is absolutely stunning. And there's actually, besides Tears in Heaven, there's 2 other tracks. One he does with Buddy Guy, and another song called Wake Me Up Before. Yeah, wake me.
Not
it's
before you go.
I don't want to say Wake Me Up because I'm going to be like, no, it's not Wake Me Up Before You Go. No, it's
don't know which way to go.
Help Me Up. Sorry, Help Me Up.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
there it is. Yep. So
Yeah, and by that time he'd kind of established his touring band, and they show up on this, right? You know, like you said, Greg Fillinganes, Nathan East, Steve Ferroni.
So yeah, I mean, just a lot of these players, the names you just get to know, and when things
And
like
people want to play with Clapton. That's the thing too. So
that's right.
it's not like he's a pariah for all the problems he's had. People still want,
The thing about Clapton, if he likes you, especially in guitar, if you're a young guitar player, he'll do anything he can to, and he's done this for Doyle Bramhall, whose career never really took off. He was in a band called Archangels with Tim Sexton. It was because Doyle had collaborated, his father had collaborated with Stevie Ray Vaughan, and Jimmy Vaughan, and so Doyle was sort of playing in that band, kind of with Double Trouble after Stevie Ray was died. Beyond that, his career never really took off as an artist. He did some solo work, and I think Clapton saw a lot of himself in him because he was addicted to heroin and all this kind of thing. So he was like, "This is me."
Yeah.
So he kind of took him under his wing, put him in his touring band, and he's been a frequent collaborator ever since. And he's gone on to do bigger. We talked about Sheryl Crow. He collaborated with her as well.
Yeah,
in more ways than one, as well.
And his buddy throughout the years is George Harrison, right? I mean, that's the whole thing too. Is they had a long-standing friendship.
Yep.
That through all that, you would think that there would be some acrimony or animosity, and no, they just stayed good pals up until the end. And after George Harrison passed, Clapton would be the musical director for the Concert for George, which as a and really did justice to a lot. The songs that Clapton did them fantastically as well.
I think the
really
reason
honored George Harrison.
The reason I love that so much is because of the time that we got into these people, and we're talking about Jeff Lynne as well. We're talking about George Harrison, and he was kind of like the this wheelhouse of all these artists, and to see them all together,
all the collaborators,
was very touching to me. And seeing all the people that toured with Clapton over the years, Katie Kassoon and Tessa Niles, his 2 backup singers, and Ray Cooper and Andy Fairweather Lowe, when first time I watched that show, I teared up. I just, because it just brought everything back, around this time, the time when this album came out, and this was the album that introduced me to all of these people, and so. Yeah, and
that's why Journeyman again. Yeah, it was such a special time, and we caught it. Like we caught Clapton, I think, at the right time as far as like getting into him, right? Because you were coming out of the prog stuff with Genesis, and I was kind of like I said, the stuff I was listening to was kind of becoming a little more dormant in the late '80s. So he shows up with this song "Pretending" and "Bad Love," and I'm kind of like, let me grab it. Let me grab this CD. And I totally recommend anybody. Like I said, if you're, don't be scared by us talking about Clapton and the blues, because this is not a full on blues album. It's got some blues stuff in it, and he even does Hound Dog, but not the Elvis Presley version. But
he does
the original,
it very much in the original style.
Yeah,
like he's
a
traditionalist.
He's a purist. And
Mama,
before you accuse me,
version,
is a standard also. A blues standard, and he does that one really well.
Hard Times is fantastic. The Ray Charles tune. Billy Joel said it. He goes, he sounds like Ray Charles on that song. He goes, Billy Joel, like really, I remember him specifically commenting on that one track. He's like, Eric, I couldn't believe it was Eric Clapton. I thought it was Ray Charles when he, because he, again, grew into that voice, that sort of crooning type voice, which was,
and he's got some gruff behind it too. So I like, he's got like a little bit of a roar, like in his voice, which I like when he goes there with it. Like, so that's what I dug about this is and like we said, Jerry Williams really this guy is just an unsung hero, anchored this album with his songwriting and just kind of giving Clapton the material that he can interpret.
Just somebody we don't know. Again, he's not a very famous artist. He's a singer-songwriter from Texas, guitar player. And he wrote the bulk of the song, Forever. And he also wrote Forever Man on Behind the Sun and Something's Happening and the 3 tracks that, and then the five songs was Pretending, Anything for Your Love,
Running on Faith,
No Alibis. And he co-wrote one of the other tracks.
Breaking Point.
Yep.
So that's a lot of it. And then, like I said, there's 3 covers in there as well. And then you've got some stuff that Clapton co-wrote as well. So that's the thing is he's not, Clapton's not a prolific songwriter. But he can interpret, and that's what a good blues player does anyway, is interpret those things and make them your own. So he was able to take the Jerry Williams stuff and really find some simpatico with it and kind of really connect to it. And you would never know. That was the whole thing. When I started researching this, I didn't realize that he didn't write most of this.
Yeah,
but it sounds so Clapton.
As I recall, because you were such a fan of people like Jeff Lynne, that pretty much wrote everything, did everything, so you were very much in that wheelhouse, and you were actually very disappointed that he didn't write Pretending, as I recall. It's like, but then I think I turned around and said, well, Elvis didn't write anything.
Yeah, he didn't.
Right? I was like, Elvis didn't write a lick of his own stuff.
But you know what? He had a really good manager who gave him songwriting credits. So even though he didn't write stuff, he was actually credited. But he didn't. That's a smart guy.
But you mentioned interpretation though, and that a lot of blues music is that nobody cared especially back in the day. These guys covered each other. You never knew who wrote what. Yeah, it's like this is Ray Charles or this is like Muddy Waters. But Muddy Waters didn't write a lot of his own stuff either.
Yeah, they just became standards because everybody was just doing them, and they were just songs that were just out there that people would kind of pick up on. Led Zeppelin was the same thing too, right? They co-opted a lot of these standards that they didn't think or didn't realize people. The guy that actually wrote it would actually come after them.
Yeah.
Good on Clapton for Journeyman.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, how do you? I'm interested in knowing, how do you rate Eric Clapton as a guitar player?
I always give you guff. I always give Eric a lot of shit over Clapton only because of the Last Waltz. If you go back and listen to our Last Waltz episode, and you'll kind of hear the little backstory about it.
Yeah.
And I do that just to irk him, just to kind of nudge him a little bit. No, Clapton is the one thing. The thing I love about Clapton, and I've always loved about watching him play, that I don't really recall seeing with any other guitar player, seriously, is he makes guitar playing look so effortless.
Yeah.
His technique does not look forced. It never looks like he's struggling like to pull the notes out. He just his style is just like, he's been up and down that fretboard so many times that it's almost like he's sleepwalking. And I don't mean that in a bad way. These notes just come out of him so naturally because he's so proficient at it. Different than in Eddie Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen is very proficient at the guitar as well, in a different way. In his style and his approach is very different. Yeah. And Clapton is he's as smooth as silk. That's the thing I like and appreciate. I love watching Clapton play.
That's right.
Because it's just like so. He makes it look so easy. That's what it is. He makes it look like somebody else could probably play this because he's not making faces, he's not grimacing, he's not looking like he's in pain.
Yeah.
He's just like laying these riffs down and laying stuff out. So I would put him, I mean, how could you not put him in a top 10 or a top 5, regardless of your, of anything, regardless of what type of music you're into?
Yeah.
That's why I said top 5 or top 10. He would have to be in there. Like, I don't see how he couldn't.
I totally agree. And the thing about, people like to put him on this sort of guitar god status. And I don't, there's a lot of the stuff, like, ironically enough, I'm not a huge fan of like the Cream era. Like I prefer the understated guitar playing, because he really knew how to make the guitar sing.
Yeah.
And I say that as a vocalist, like I love vocals, and I'm a frustrated vocalist, or singer or whatever. But he is the first guitar player that I actually paid attention to because of his style, like the single notes, it's actually emulating a human voice. And he doesn't exploit the guitar like a lot of players do. And I'm going to say, this is going to sound weird, but there's a lot of players that to me just absolutely rape the guitar. I mean, they just like all this kind of, like Jeff Beck is one of those players who really gets in there, and he likes the mechanics of, the flashy and the whammy bar. And Clapton, he treats the guitar like it's very elegant. It's a very elegant instrument. There's reverence there. There's care, and that I love that about him. I love that. Just that he'll pick up a guitar and look at it as if he's looking at a painting, or he has such respect for the instrument. And that's what I love most about him. And I've seen him on tours where there's like kids my son's age right now, sitting there in their seat like this. Yeah. And because you could see like the Diamond Vision screen and the close up of his hands all the time. Like they always go to his hands, right? And they're studying. They're not sitting there cheering him on. They're not, they're watching what he's doing, because obviously these kids are probably learning how to play guitar.
Yeah, it's like taking a class. I do have to mention though, Robbie Robertson did blow him off the stage at the last waltz, so we're just going to leave that out there. Just a little quick aside that he did. But again, Clapton was like a wreck at that point anyway, so he was.
But guess what? Why do I like the last waltz so much? Why do I love Robbie Robertson so much? Because of it's because of Eric Clapton that I actually bothered to watch the last waltz, because at that point I was really getting into him, and we watched it together as we talked about. But it was really
with his velvet.
Eric
tux.
Clapton's there, right? It's like exactly. So, but
his
he's not the star of the show. No, and
he was
half in the bag. He was in really bad shape.
They all were at the last waltz. I mean, Robbie Robertson. I don't know how much thinner he could get, and take that for what it. Rick Danko was pretty.
He was shaking like a leaf the whole time.
They were all out of it, but that was the time. But you know what? But these guys played through all that too. That's the amazing thing is I don't know how these guys do this kind of stuff and then have the wherewithal to be coherent enough to play.
But that's the shame of it though, because Clapton will turn around and I've read things about, and it shakes me to the core to think that he doesn't remember any of it, and that's a shame. And I think about all the time and all that wasted because of the substance abuse, that he could have been a much better player and have done things more if he had just let that drive him. And in a sense it did, but he just couldn't let that other stuff go.
Yeah, well, he had his demons.
He traded one addiction for another.
Yeah,
and it just kept going. But what are you going to do?
I think that's gonna close it out for Eric Clapton and Journeyman. Definitely it's a very accessible album. Really, check this one out. It is slightly dated only because there are some little echoes and tinges of the 80s. But Clapton is full like. He's not 80s-fied though. He's not doing 80s style songs. He's ripping through these songs.
He's ripping through them, and he's pulling that 80s out of. He's stepping back from that polished sound, and he's doing other things. There's enough other things on this album to convince you that this is not a straight up 80s record.
Yeah.
So there it is.
And the biggest contrast, I started listening to August just before. Yeah. And there's absolutely a totally different sound and a different feel to it. And when you step into Journeyman, it's kind of like, where he's, shedding a lot of that stuff, a lot of the slick stuff, and just getting back into and firing off some solos. Oh my God. Firing off just great riffs that catch you into the song and really, expert songwriting. So this is a recipe for like we said, his strongest album of the 80s, probably one of his strongest in his canon of solo and collaborative work. We're definitely going to put it up there. So you can absolutely go check that out. It's streaming. It's on Spotify. And you can go check him out playing in the rain on the Pretending video. You can go check out YouTube. I'll drop a link because that's one of my favorite videos. So we'll drop a link to the Pretending video in the show notes if you are so inclined to check those out. That's going to do it for this episode of the 3324 podcast. Thanks as always for joining. Every Thursday, we've got these big, beautiful, full-length episodes where we talk about great music and movie content that we love to talk about. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast as well. You can even say hi to us and we'll say hi back. We'll give you like a virtual wave, or we'll give you like a thumbs up icon or a smiley face. We will absolutely do that. So come and check us out. Come and join us there. We'd love to see you. Every other Wednesday, we do live shows as well. So you can be a part of the conversation and tell us what you think. And that's going to do it for this episode. So for Eric, this has been Dean, and we will see you on the flip side.
You've been listening to the 3324 podcast with Dean Legiro and Eric Kuber. You can find us on your favorite podcast provider, so please like, subscribe, and rate to become a part of the 3324 family. Your feedback is important, so make sure to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at 3324 podcast and on Twitter at 3324p to join the conversation.